Hi everyone, I'm Jesse Lin.
And I'm Angela Lin. Welcome back to another episode of But Where Are You Really From? Today, if you saw the episode title, you might be like, WTF, what is this? Or maybe you completely understand what we're talking about. The episode title is Bethenny's Dior bags, parentheses UAP. Basically, we are talking about the drone activity that has been going on for multiple months now that some people may know about and a lot of people don't know about. And let me break down the title for you real quick. So basically, this title comes from TikTok because this drone activity has been going on since around Christmas time, I think is when like the first murmurs of sightings came about. So many people were talking about the drones and posting footage of these like massive quote unquote SUV sized drones that people were spotting in the sky, like fleets sometimes in the sky across multiple states, largely on the East Coast of the US. But anyways, many people were posting these videos, and originally they were calling them drones. They were just saying what they were, but there seemed to have been some suppression of those types of videos. So Bethenny Frankel, the Real Housewife, who is also an entrepreneur, Skinny Margarita, and also just like a influencer now in her own right, she suddenly became like the loudest voice about the drones, and she's the one who started this movement of calling them Dior bags instead of drones, so that it was kind of like a code word to get around the algorithm suppressing the drone videos or talk about the drones. But anyways, the topic at hand is these drones. What's been really interesting to me about it, whatever you think about it, is the lack of media coverage of what has been going on for multiple months, considering that it was happening across multiple states and for just like every day, weeks and months on end. Something like that, I would believe, should be national news, but very few, if any, major news outlets were covering it. I think some local news stations were trying to cover it because, yeah, it was happening like in their cities or whatever. But most people were getting the information from TikTok, which is, you know, you can believe what you want about the veracity of that footage, but it's just interesting to me the kind of like lack of coverage considering the widespreadness of it all. But yeah, Jesse has a little snippet about that for secondhand knowledge.
Yeah, so my boyfriend who lives in Jersey City said that he saw the phenomena maybe a couple times a week during that like peak period, which was maybe like a couple months ago when like everybody was like, I saw the thing in Jersey. And recently he was saying like he hasn't really noticed it anymore. So I think this is quite interesting because of what you said about the news media. There's a reason that we're seeing it now and it's not clear what it is, right? There have been so many years where the government has hidden studies on things that they've done, like projects. So if you look at a bunch of like declassified stuff like Project MK Ultra, or even when they were developing the nuclear bomb, like this is all stuff that was like hidden from the public for a really long time. And so it's not a surprise that the government is good at hiding stuff. And so for me, I question less what it is and I question more why we're seeing it now, because it's probably stuff that, whether you believe it's alien technology or you believe it's like foreign adversary technology or what have you, there's a reason that it was popping up at that point in time. And I think it's interesting to speculate about what that reason might be, right? Because again, I think the government, if they didn't want you to know that that was a thing, I mean, you wouldn't know basically. So I think there is a good reason to ask why we were seeing whatever that phenomena was at that point in time. And also, like, there were many local politicians, and even I think our governor was like, we need to like investigate what is going on here. And then kind of after the initial call to arms, if you will, there really wasn't much of a follow-up, which I think is also kind of interesting. You could see it a number of ways, right? You could just call it another topic that died due to the goldfish attention span of current politics, or you could say that maybe they received information about it and they're like, yeah, maybe it's better that the public doesn't know, or something else. But definitely interesting thing that everyone experienced, which was kind of like bizarre and random.
Yeah, to me, it just feels really gaslighty. Obviously, the government knows more than they're letting on about. But what's interesting is like essentially silence for a long time, because this crossed administrations, right? It started under Biden, and then like once Trump took over. It's like the new administration. Under Biden, they kind of were just like, we don't know what it is. I don't know. Like, and they were like, no answers, whatever. And then Trump or his administration did say like 2 weeks ago, maybe they were just like, oh, they're ours. I was like, that is also an unsatisfactory answer. Like, what does that even mean? Even if it's ours, like, why are they doing this? Because people were talking about folks in New Jersey and other states that were experiencing this. They were like, imagine like an SUV in the sky, essentially. And they're like, it was following me. Like, there were people who are like, literally, it like followed my car for like multiple blocks, or like I can see that it's like doing the same kind of like perimeter over and over again, as if it's like mapping an area. You know, if you're the people living within this area, watching these massive things in the sky, like watching you, essentially following you, potentially mapping your house. And then even if they are like the American government, like, is that something you should feel good about? I don't think so. I wouldn't feel good about that. Like, what are you even doing? And then at worst, well, no, not at worst. It could be anything, right? But like you mentioned alien technology, but let's like rule that out. A lot of people don't like to even fathom that's a thing. Let's just say it's just human things, but foreign adversary. Yeah, like there were some rumors, and you know, obviously we don't know because no one has really confirmed with hard evidence of anything, but there were some rumors from some like special forces people that it was like potentially Iranian drones or potentially Chinese spy drones, whatever. And it's like, okay, if they are, like, isn't that alarming? Because people were experiencing like mapping of their areas. What kind of information are they gathering, and are they planning something? Like, it seems pretty weird to be circulating the same areas over and over again in a mapping kind of formation. Doesn't really seem harmless, because that's kind of the way that the government keeps painting it. It's like, oh, it's whatever, it's no big deal. But other people have also talked about like, you know, everyone's kind of like first thing they pull out is like, it's 2025. How come we don't have like 4K footage of like everything, right? Like every time you see footage of something, it's like some super blurry footage, right? But if you think about it, especially at night, if you use your phone, and even if you try to take a picture of the moon, right? Like every time someone tries to take like a nice eclipse photo or some shit like that, like it looks terrible. It doesn't look like anything, even though we have these amazing phones now. So I can understand why people don't really have good footage. But a lot of people are like, well, a lot of people have normal drones. Like, can't you just fly your drone up to like take footage of these drones so that we can get better imagery? And a lot of people reported that those like the hobbyist drones were getting shot down by these like the SUV size things. So like you have to wonder what the hell is going on. Like, even if you just think these are human, whether they're domestic or foreign controlled, like human created drones. And then the other aspect of it, which I know a lot of people are like, I don't believe that, is, yeah, there is speculation. It's like, well, what if it's not human created? Because there was a mix of things that people were witnessing. So I think the ones that were often described as the SUV size things and like had certain lights, many people debunk that as like, that's not alien technology, because why do they all have FAA compliant lights like flashing on there? Yeah, they wouldn't have that kind of design if it weren't, you know, created by humans. So fine. But then there were also reports and some footage, which you can kind of, we're in the age of AI, it's very strange. You can't necessarily know what's like totally real or not. But there were these like plasmoids, what people were describing as plasmoids. So if you imagine like, instead of literally a structural thing, like the footage I saw was kind of like, if you imagine looking into a microscope at like bacteria or something that's just like moving, it's kind of like that, kind of almost like a living structure, but with light. So people were calling them plasmoids. So then there was speculation that these SUV sized drones were actually trying to get closer to the plasmoids to like investigate what those were. And then you're kind of hiding that there were plasmoids to begin with by making, you know, filling the sky with the explainable SUV sized drones. So there was just so much speculation, and my biggest just like fishiness around it is that they just try to wave it off. They either pretend like it didn't happen, didn't cover it at all, aka all the media, or administration wise just said like, oh, NBD, like don't worry about it, but like as if don't believe your own eyes, because at this point it's like whole populations of people that are seeing this, and not once but like weeks, months on end. So it just like feels so gaslighting to me, the entire thing.
I didn't even know that there was that secondary speculation. That is like a inception level speculation of stuff. Yeah, I mean, personally, I always trend towards the more practical explanation, and I feel like it would have been weird enough to be like, this is some kind of drone program that we either accidentally lost control of, or like the operator was asleep at the wheel or something.
For months.
No, that's what I'm saying. Like, but that would be like a one-time situation. And so this is like a repeat situation, suggests like something more. But weird to say that there's like no reason to be alarmed. I mean, like, it's already odd enough to say that given the history of flying objects in New York City. I think people have the right to be alarmed when there's like low altitude flying objects in New York City. So very bizarre that there was not like more follow through or explanation, but it just suggests that it must be connected to something that's like a top secret government program. I kind of feel like if it was a state adversary situation, I would love to understand more about like why, if it was like a test to see if they could get drones here to attack something. The surveillance thing is quite interesting, but I kind of feel like in the current age, like you don't really need low altitude surveillance to find people. Like you can find people through cell signal. It would be kind of strange why you would want low altitude drones, but I could definitely see like since drones are now like heavily used in warfare instead of people, I could see how they could be interested in floating drones to this area, which is crazy and terrifying. But I don't think like the government would be like, don't panic if it was a foreign adversary drone. Like I hope they would be like, everyone should leave the area.
That's what I'm saying.
Which then makes me think it's some kind of like domestic program and they were doing something with it. The government is not going to show you something unless they're doing it for a reason. So the exposure to the public, for me, I speculate was some kind of testing, maybe even to see like how many people would notice something was happening.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like if it were for an adversary, I think to your point, it's not like they need to fly that low to get intel per se, but it would be a very obvious show of force of like, we could do this anytime. Like we're just hovering right now, but we could be dropping bombs right now, which is like the drones are able to do a lot of damage. And especially because it was on the East Coast. So I don't remember if it was just speculation that they could have done this or they actually were around DC. But that was another, like, the speculation of why it would have been foreign adversaries is like kind of saying like, we could park ourselves atop the White House right now if we wanted to. And like, just to show you, we could. And then the pessimistic way of looking at it is like, if that were the case and the government said, oh, NBD, don't worry about it, it's because they are trying to figure out some sort of like counter plan, and it's not in their interest to share that with the public, right? So they just kind of go with like, oh, the risk level of immediate danger we assess as like low enough to tell the public this is us and no big deal until like something actually happens, and then we have to fess up that was actually like adversaries, and yeah, we're trying to figure out how to like counter it. If it were domestic, I agree with you. I think the other, it's like all pessimistic. If it were us, it's definitely an experiment of some sort. Like, again, to your point, like they don't need to fly that low and they're always spying on us. Let's be real. US government is also always spying on us. Like Apple always knows exactly what we were talking about 2 seconds ago and then feeds you an ad. Like they're already spying on us, but it reminds me of that video we all watched when we're millennials. So maybe not all of you Gen Z watch this, but that video of like, you know, people playing basketball and there's like a gorilla that like runs through the court, but you're told to like watch the people playing basketball, so you don't even notice that there was like a person dressed as a gorilla running through the court. So I do wonder if it was some sort of experiment to see like how gaslighty can we play things, because when we do want to do something crazy and have people just believe that their minds are tricking them, how far could we go? Because this was very concentrated within like a handful of states on the East Coast, but a wide swath of population, and especially without the media confirming it as like a real thing, all those people really were left kind of feeling like, am I going crazy? Like, why is nobody talking about this? So yeah, from a very pessimistic like domestic point of view, I could see it being some sort of experiment.
Yeah, I think the more interesting reason for me is like, why they were doing the testing and like what exactly they were trying to get a response from the general public on.
You've heard me complain about how weird it is to be an American-born Mandarin speaker because I grew up speaking Mandarin at home and have a passing native accent, but simultaneously sound like a child when trying to talk about real things. Since I realized no one out there was catering to people like us and decided, I'm just going to do it myself, I teamed up with my native Taiwanese Mandarin language teacher to create Real You Mandarin, a self-paced online Mandarin course built specifically for ABCs and ABTs. All of our content is video-based, realistic dialogues centered on topics you'd actually want to talk about, from dating and pop culture to media representation and growing up as a minority in a majority society. You'll learn the relevant vocabulary in the context you actually use them and be able to practice them daily with pre-built digital flashcards. You'll also be able to practice speaking by shadowing, repeating back, or following along with all of these dialogues to practice speaking at natural speed with the right pronunciations. Check out the course at realumandarin.com and get 10% off using promo code WhereAreYouFrom10. Let us help you express the real you when you speak Mandarin. Hey listeners, wondering how you can support us? The biggest way is by increasing our visibility by following us on Instagram at WhereAreYouFromPod, on TikTok at But Where Are You Really From, subscribing to our YouTube channel under But Where Are You Really From Podcast, rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, and telling your friends. The more people we can get to listen to the show, the more we can continue spotlighting different perspectives and stories. And if you feel so inclined, we're also accepting donations at buymeacoffee.com/whereareyouFrom. Thanks y'all.
I find it interesting from a, if you want to call it philosophical point of view, which is that like, should citizens be made fully aware of all the things that the government is doing, or are certain things better left withheld for reasons of public safety? And would it create a huge public panic to let people know what is happening, assuming that it's a benign event, right? Like it's not something that is actually they need to be worried about, versus being fully transparent as to what is happening. Most likely, most members of Congress don't actually know what this is, and probably even higher levels of the Pentagon probably don't even know what it is. Like maybe like the Joint Chiefs of Staff and like the generals do, but it's probably like them, the president, probably not many other people know. Like it doesn't seem like something that would be widely disclosed. And I think it's an interesting thing to discuss as to whether or not full transparency is in the best interest of the public. I'm not saying for or against, but I think there is an argument to be made that like certain news that's benign made available to the public can cause a panic, whereas just not sharing that news would not cause that to happen, and it's not really a big deal anyways. Not that saying that this is the case, but yeah.
Yeah, I have thoughts, but it's fine. It's fine. But what you just said veers into the other half of the conversation that I was staying away from. But it's because you already mentioned Congress and what people demanded to know, don't know, even amongst Congress itself. The reason UAP, well, I mean, these SUV-sized drones are technically considered UAP as well. For those who don't know, UAP is a new way of referring to UFOs, but the new acronym is unidentified anomalous phenomenon. And just so people know, like, why do they even change it from UFO to UAP? One is that obviously there's a stigma around the term UFO because people think of aliens only. But the term unidentified just means exactly that. Like, you don't know what it is. Also, F was flying, and it's not always flying. There have been a lot of new technologies that are unidentified that people can't really know yet what they are, that are not just flying but also under the water, like in the ocean. So then that encompasses like the full spectrum of these like things, right? So that's why it's UAP now instead of UFO. So speaking of Congress and like trying to get transparency and like whether or not we should get transparency for the, you know, the public around these things, it's another thing where like mass media didn't totally cover it either, but like in the past year or so, Congress had been pressing for further transparency and release of documents around the reverse engineering program for UAP. So this is an actual program that exists that the government has been funding for like decades now. And it is around the retrieval of technology that they find, whether it was flying technology or ocean or whatever, but it's not ours. It's always technology that is like not explainable from like modern technology standpoint. And again, if you want to be a skeptic, it could be, it's like foreign technology from like another country that's just like they're way more advanced than we are and everything's secret, especially when it comes to military things. So maybe, China or Iran or wherever is like way more advanced than we are in certain technologies, and that's why they were able to make these flying things or ocean things that we just can't explain. Wherever the origins of these things were, this program has existed for like many decades, and it's been a practice to have this like secret program where people are in charge of retrieving these objects and trying to figure out how the technology works. And so in the past year, there have been many Congress hearings where certain Congress people have been pushing for like transparency. There have been whistleblowers who literally worked in the program or still work in the program trying to release some of this information. You keep getting kind of like ping-ponged of like, how much should we release? How much should we not? I think it's going at the same question, right? And like we can't know for sure where this all comes from, but it is interesting. Something to note is that around the same time all these drones were happening, there were also whistleblowers from like former special forces or former members of the reverse engineering program who were whistleblowing around things that they have experienced either firsthand or secondhand in terms of like technology that was retrieved. And in this case, some of them were explicitly talking about alien encounters as part of what they were whistleblowing. And of note, only one like quote unquote real news outlet was talking about it, and some people will still like brush it off like News Nation's not a real news outlet. Okay, I mean News Nation is, but it's not NBC, it's not CNN, whatever, but it is like an actual news organization, and they had some exclusive interviews about these encounters that those people claim were with like alien presences or technology. And so another way to think about all this, if you do have any appetite for believing in non-human things, is that the drone stuff, the SUV stuff, was to distract you from the whistleblower information around the alien encounters, or to mix it all up so that you start just disbelieving what could be truth. The more you make something sound ridiculous, or the more you try to focus energy and attention on something that can be explainable, the less likely people are to believe something that seems unfathomable but is like getting spun up into the same thing. So as someone who is more keen on believing somewhat like woo-woo things, I noticed how little attention the like whistleblower information was getting because of all the SUV sized drone stuff that people were like, oh, we can explain all this. So that's my like, I'm trying to mix those two together because they're all about UAP, and that's my pessimistic view of it, is that there's a part of it that was totally explainable, and then there was like a whole other thing that was happening that was getting kind of like masked and like overtaken by the more explainable aspect.
Yeah, I mean, we'll never know because no one will ever tell us. But I think it's like an interesting thing. For me, I always wonder, because I play a lot of video games where you have to make these decisions, right? And a lot of the decisions are often like tell everybody the truth and let them make their own decision, or withhold the truth and like, you work out these like consequences for the things you do. And I often wonder, like, if we did find out aliens were real, what would happen? And I think that is like partially core to the question of what's happening at hand if it is aliens, because it's like, if you told people they were aliens, not really much they could do about anything. I don't personally know what I would do. I would be like, oh, that's like mind-blowing, but at the same time, it's like, what am I supposed to reorient about my life or like do differently on a day-to-day? But I feel like a good portion of the population would simply panic, and you would see like a lot of the bizarre, like not the COVID stuff, but whenever there's a regular weather event, people go to the store and they buy everything. So I feel like it's that kind of thing where it's like, I would love to know the truth, but I feel like for a lot of people, the truth would cause more harm and less benefit to their lives, or net no benefit to their life. I'm like, what is the right thing to do here? Anyways, we hope you guys had a really interesting journey this episode. And actually, that's kind of our question to you guys. What do you guys think about this phenomena? Do you believe it's military action? Do you believe it's foreign adversary action? Is it aliens? And also really curious to think, like, what would you do if it was one of those things? Like, how would you go about your life differently?
Yeah, let us know what you think in the comments of wherever you're listening to or watching this, and come back next week because we will have another fresh episode for you then. And until then,
再见, bitches.